Hi, anatomy students. We're going to talk about the heart today. So first, let's take a look at a very brief overview. On the picture on the left, you see that we have the heart in the center, and then we have these two circuits. One loop, which is shorter, which involves the lungs, and then a second loop, which is larger, which involves the rest of the body. What is happening here is that we breathe air in that is oxygen rich, and then we are getting all of that oxygen into our lungs. The blood that we have in our lungs is going to return to the heart through some blood vessels, and then the left side of our heart is going to pump that oxygenated blood out to the rest of the body. In the blood, in the body tissues and organs, we're going to have something called gas exchange occurring, where the blood is going to drop off the oxygen that it got from the lungs, and it's going to pick up waste products and carbon dioxide from our body tissues. And now our deoxygenated blood is going to return to the right-hand side of the heart, which is then going to pump that deoxygenated blood to the lungs. There in the lungs, we have gas exchange that occurs again, where carbon dioxide is dropped off and expelled from the body when we exhale, and then the blood picks up new oxygen from new air that we breathe in, and then the whole thing starts all over again. This top loop, which is much smaller, is called pulmonary circulation, while the larger loop that is down here at the bottom is called systemic circulation. Anything that has the word pulmonary in it has to do with the lungs. And so, as I said, the left side of the lungs, of the heart, is going to drive systemic circulation. It's going to push oxygenated blood out of the aorta and up to the head and the arms, and then down into the abdomen and the lower extremities. Gas exchange is going to occur there. And then it returns back to the right-hand side of the heart through two great vessels called the inferior vena cava and the superior vena cava. Then the right side of the heart is going to drive pulmonary circulation. So deoxygenated blood that has entered the right-hand side of the heart is going to be pumped through the pulmonary trunk and the pulmonary arteries to the lungs, where gas exchange occurs. And then oxygenated blood returns back to the left side of the heart through the pulmonary veins. Now you may be wondering, well, why are the pulmonary veins colored red? Veins typically carry deoxygenated blood. That is true. Most veins in the body do carry deoxygenated blood. However, the classification of a blood vessel as being a vein or an artery is not coming from the type of blood that it carries. It comes from the direction of blood flow. Blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart are called arteries away, whereas blood vessels that return blood to the heart are called veins. Veins are the return lane. So this is a video on YouTube that you can watch to view pulmonary and systemic circulation. The heart itself is about the size of a fist in females. In most males, it's about the size of the fist. And then if you take your other hand and then cover it, that's about the size of a male heart. It's found a little bit to the left of your sternum. The wider top portion of the heart is called the base, kind of like how the base of the triangle is always the wider portion, whether it's upside down or right side up. And then off of the base is going to sprout the great vessels, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The pointy part of the heart is called the apex. The apex rests on the diaphragm, and it's at about the level of the fifth rib. And the heart is kind of tilted towards the left side of our chest. Now, the heart is protected by a bag that is called the pericardium. The pericardial sac has multiple layers. The most superficial layer is made of fibrous connective tissue, dense irregular connective tissue, and that is called the fibrous pericardium, or the fibrous layer of the pericardium. And in this picture, you can see that it's kind of like a whitish grayish color. And here you can see that the fibers are attached to this great vessel that is sprouting off of the base of the heart. This vessel is actually the left pulmonary artery. And you can see that the fibers are attached up here. So the pericardium is kind of like one of those wax bags that you get when you buy a donut from Dunkin' Donuts. Like the outside of the bag feels like a regular paper bag, but the inside of the bag is lined with wax so that the chocolate icing on your donut doesn't seep through the bag. And that's kind of what the pericardium is. So the fibrous portion is like the paper bag outside of your donut bag. And then on the inside, you have a second layer here, which is called the serous layer. And so that's this tiny little portion right here that I'm kind of drawing a red line in. So the serous layer, as you can see, is going to fold over on itself. And where it actually touches, which I'm just going to draw with little X's here, where it actually touches the heart tissue itself, its name changes. It's still a serous layer, but now we're calling it the epicardium. Or we're going to call it the visceral pericardium, which is another name for that layer of cells. And remember, anything that has visceral in front of it means that it's actually touching the cells that make up the organ itself. Now, in between my serous layer and my visceral layer, I have a gap. That gap is called the pericardial cavity, and it's filled with fluid called serous fluid, which is secreted by cells that make up this serous layer of the pericardium. And this fluid, along with the pericardium itself, is going to function to protect the heart. The heart and the lungs are constantly moving 24 hours a day. And if they didn't have protection around them, the friction in between the heart tissue and the lung tissue would start to cause damage to that tissue. And that's something that we want to prevent. And the cushioning of the fluid and the border that is provided by the pericardial sac, all of that is going to help protect the heart and the lungs from damage due to friction. This is another video that you can watch. It does a very nice job of highlighting the portions of the pericardium. All right, now we're going to talk about the gross anatomy of the heart. And when we talk about gross anatomy, we're talking about features that we can observe with the naked eye. And so as we look at this picture of the heart, we're looking at the anterior side of the heart. So it is as if somebody is standing in front of you. This is what their heart would look like in their chest if you had X-ray vision and you could see it. The most of the anterior portion of the heart that you're seeing right in here, this is the right ventricle, and then the left ventricle is going to take up more of the posterior aspect of the heart. The other two chambers, the right atrium is here at the top, connected to the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. And the left atrium is peeking out right over here. The thing that I wanted to just mention is that you can see that there's kind of like a ruffled border here around the atria. That portion of the structure of the atria is called the auricle. And I just wanted you to know that because you are going to see that in some textbooks and things like that. But it's really just a flap that kind of usually covers over these blood vessels that are here in front. And so the flap itself has a name, and it's called the auricle. Other features that you can see from the anterior view of the heart is you see this large red blood vessel that's sprouting off the top. This is the aorta. And then over here you have the pulmonary trunk, which is going to branch off to form the pulmonary arteries. The other two that we have here are the pulmonary veins. So we've got like the chambers that are made of muscle. We've got blood vessels. Let's talk about the structure of the heart. All right, so now what we're doing is we're looking at a section of the heart so that we can see the inside of it. So this is the wall of the heart. We're calling it the myocardium. So the epicardium is another name for that visceral serous layer that makes up the pericardium. So this is yet another name for this portion of the pericardium itself. The myocardium is the actual muscle cells that do the contracting of the heart. This is the thickest layer. And then we have the endocardium, which is a slippery endothelial lining that is found inside all of the chambers of the heart. And the endocardium is a really important part of the heart because it's going to prevent platelets from sticking to it and forming blood clots. Because if you get blood clots in the heart, they can travel throughout the body, lodge in smaller blood vessels. They can cause pulmonary emboli or stroke. If it lodges like somewhere else in the body, it can block the perfusion of those organs and tissues and cause death to those parts of the body. So blood clots are bad. And remember, when we learned about broken blood vessels and the way that gauze actually works in order to control bleeding, it's the roughness of the gauze, and it was the broken collagen fibers that stuck out of the tissue of a damaged blood cell that allowed platelets to adhere to those areas and to start the blood clotting process. Again, we don't want that happening in the heart, and so the endocardium is this very slippery, smooth layer that's going to prevent clotting from occurring. On this slide, we've got a picture of the heart fibers. And the thing about the heart and the way that it actually contracts is pretty interesting because it's not going to contract just like an accordion, like in and out and in and out. You wouldn't be able to get all of the blood out of the chambers with that kind of movement. Think about wringing out a dish rag, for instance. If you just took the two ends of a sopping wet dish rag and you just squeezed them together like this, you're not going to get as much fluid out of the rag as if you took the ends of the rag and you twisted them. Well, that's exactly the action that the heart does. And the reason why the heart is able to kind of twist and shorten is because of the arrangement of the fibers that create the myocardium. So as you can see, looking at the very bottom of the heart, they're arranged in a spiral, which is called the myocardial vortex. And so when the heart contracts, it's not just like squishing together, it's actually twisting and shortening in order to push any of the blood that's found in the bottom of the chambers, like mainly the ventricles, in order to push as much of that blood out with every contraction as possible. All right, so let's go through the great vessels that are considered veins. Now remember that veins are going to carry blood toward the heart. So the two of the main veins that carry deoxygenated blood back to the heart from the rest of the body are the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. The superior vena cava is going to bring deoxygenated blood from the arms and the head back to the right atrium of the heart. And the inferior vena cava is going to carry deoxygenated blood from the abdomen and the lower extremities back to the right atrium of the heart. We also have two sets of pulmonary veins. The right pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood from the lungs back to the heart, while the left pulmonary veins are going to carry oxygenated blood from the lungs, namely the left lung, back toward the heart. And the pulmonary veins are going to dump that oxygenated blood from the lungs into the left atrium of the heart. In this picture, we only see the auricle of the left atrium, but like the actual chamber is found a little bit more posterior than what the picture is showing us here. All right, we also have great vessels that are considered arteries. The main artery that you probably know is the aorta. So it's this large arching blood vessel. It has these three branches up at the top. These are branches you don't need to know the names for. It's going to carry oxygenated blood from the left ventricle out to the rest of the body. The pulmonary trunk is going to divide into the left pulmonary artery and the right pulmonary artery. The pulmonary trunk is going to bring deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle, which is what we have here in the front of our picture, to the left pulmonary artery to take this deoxygenated blood to the lungs for oxygenation, and to the right pulmonary artery, again, to take that deoxygenated blood to the lungs to be oxygenated. All right, I'm going to stop this here and we will begin on the next slide with part 2.